What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Fantasy Golf Bag Podcast. I'm your host, Redkacheek, also go by Drew, and we will be previewing the Genesis Scottish Open ahead of the British Open, or the Open, here this week for the Genesis Scottish Open and the ISCO, actually. We'll do two different previews. So this show will be completely dedicated to the Genesis Scottish Open and being played at the Renaissance Club. We will take a look at the golf course, some recent results, and how guys shook up and down the leaderboard. And then obviously I'll have a second video for the ISCO championship. So with that being said, we can go ahead and jump into it. Unfortunate ending to the John Deere Classic with Brian Campbell winning for the second time in 2025 against Grillo. So yeah, tough when you got a Grillo ticket. Also had a Lipsky ticket, and then that, kind of shouldn't have been in that position, I guess, because the eagle on 17 was a little bit out of left field, but definitely tough when you hit that bad of a drive on 18 and bogey 18. But Grillo had plenty of chances. Campbell played pretty solid, and no one gave him a run. Honestly, Sunday for the leaders was pretty bad. Davis Thompson, Max Homa, not great. So interesting weather too in Silvis, Illinois, with the wind and the rain coming and going. So we'll see more of that this week, ironically. But yeah, let's go ahead and I'll pull up the course preview and let's talk about the golf course. So only played the last 3 years. So for the last 5 winners, we only have 3 to talk about. Very different scoring in each of those years. It's very dependent, as you all know, with the weather. But yeah, being played at the Renaissance Club, Robert McIntyre minus 18, Rory McIlroy minus 15, and Xander minus 7. Looking at the golf course, par 70, 7,200 yards. So not overly long. It is a par 70, but still 7,200 yards, not crazy. You can see the hole by hole here. Really, the par 5s, 3 and 10 are pretty gettable. 16 as well. And then hole 5, the par 4 plays almost a quarter shot under par. Hole 13 and 14 also play slightly under par. Everything else played pretty strongly over par in these last 3 years. It's really just make your birdies on those par 5s and then kind of hold on those other holes. But there's enough birdies. I mean, when you see Robert McIntyre minus 18 on a par 70, that's some serious good scoring. So there should be plenty of scoring opportunities. It's just a matter of which players can be in position and then take advantage. So we got the average par 3, 186, average par 4, 450, average par 5, 590. So honestly, the par 5s, what do we got? 600, 594, 576. 576 kind of on the shorter end. That's where most of the yardage is. And then the par 3s, let's see, 147, 218. There's a long one. 204, 161, 203. So pretty spread out. I would say the one short one being hole 6 at 147. The rest, right around 190 to 210, we'll call it. Pretty average for the PGA Tour. And then the par 4s are just all over the place. You can see that down at the bottom as well with the yardage for the par 4s. A couple longer ones. 460 is about average. 490, then 422, 338, very short. 505 on the longer side. And then we got a couple regular ones, 448, 475, 418. Hole 18 is interesting, being depending on where the wind is, 483. And I forget what Rory had in, was it 2 years ago? I want to say he had a 2-iron or 3-iron. Had a hit up punch shot in there. So definitely dependent on the wind and how long this golf course can play. Otherwise, it's pretty much a bomb it, try to go low, hit a bunch of mid irons and some short irons, and it could be a birdie fest for sure. So we'll talk into the specifics of our stats. Excuse me. The average winning score, those 3 years, 13 under par. Average cut line, about 1 under par. What you guys mostly care about, the driving and the approach stuff. I will say it's pretty easy. This is a a pretty quick one to summarize. There's not too much nuance here, but like the driving distance is down slightly. It's basically tour average. Driving accuracy is way down at 52%. So that's the first thing. It's like, okay, well, is it really tough to hit fairways, or are they just not prioritizing hitting the fairways? And then you go to the next slide right here, missed fairway penalty being down 0.06 shots off the tour average. Basically, this is guys are ripping it. They don't really care. There's a few holes where, because they're clubbing down, the position actually, wouldn't say it matters, but obviously if you're clubbing down, position matters. That's why you're doing it. But for all the other holes, we'll look at the driving breakouts here in a second. Just rip it. Fairway, rough, it doesn't matter. The missed fairway penalty is so low at this golf course. So driving distance, and you can also hover, which is kind of cool. The driving distance bucket, or I shouldn't say bucket, the stat, you can see a gradual increase between guys that made the cut, top 25, top 10, and then obviously the winner with Rory and Xander in there probably skews it a little bit more than it should be, but you could definitely see a gradual increase between, everyone that missed the cut, that made the cut, top 25, top 10, just keeps going up and up. So driving distance, definitely an important factor. Driving accuracy is the opposite. So like in the top 10, some of those guys hit 1% more fairways. The winner, not so much. And again, that goes back to Rory and Xander in 2022. So missed fairway penalty. Let's look at some of the approach numbers. The green regulation is down a little bit. Not a big deal. Missed green regulation penalty is down quite a bit. So it's just slower greens. It's just not going to be as demanding on the approach or the around the green shots as a typical PGA Tour course. There's more options. Mainly the greens are being slow. We got it at 10 on the stimp meter, which is about 2 to 3 feet slower than the PGA Tour. And that just adds to, basically you can do whatever you want with a golf ball up and around the green. It's not going to be running off and having false edges that you got to be careful of. It's pretty generous around the green. And obviously you can putt it. There's plenty of opportunities to do that. So missed green regulation penalty is pretty low. Green regulation from the fairway, 74.5%. Green regulation from the rough is 46%, which is 3% higher than the tour average. So like I said, missed fairway penalty is pretty much non-existent. Just distance. You can see the distance penalty is up too. I didn't even talk about that. So the distance penalty here is 0.22 shots, basically meaning that for every drive less than the field average on any given hole, they are averaging almost a full quarter of a shot over the field because of that drive. So a pretty big difference off of what we saw at like the John Deere Classic. You think about the Florida courses, I just go back to those, the Honda Classic, Valspar, there's not much of a distance aspect. Those distance penalties are basically non-existent. So interesting dynamic here with driving being a big part of the success that you can have. Scrambling about the same, birdie or better down goes with the par 70. That's typically in line. And then bogey or worse, about tour average, 1% higher. Not a big deal. All right. Let's look at the breakdown. Strokes gained by finish position. Then we'll look at the driving distance buckets and approach buckets. As always, I'll take out the winner, especially with 3 years. We have 3 winners versus, looking at the top 10, we have 30, 40, 50 guys in that bucket. So you can see how, 3 players versus 40 would be unfair as far as the weighting would go. So we'll take out the winner and just look at the top 10, top 25 made cut. The biggest difference here, obviously, approach is a big factor. I guess I'll go in order. So like off the tee, off the made cut to a top 25 is a decent chunk. 1.2 strokes off the tee for top 25, 0.4 for those who made the cut. So about 0.8 strokes. You could round it up to a full stroke. Top 10 though is nothing. It's the exact same for top 25 and top 10. You don't see that very often, but like there's between the top 10 and the top 25 finishers off the tee was identical. Approach is the next difference maker. You can see even those who made the cut actually hit their irons pretty well, gaining over a stroke, which is interesting to see. Then we have top 25s, 2.2, top 10s, 2.96. So again, not a huge difference in what we see between the made cut guys, top 25 and top 10. The main kind of big break, I guess, would be the made cut to top 25. But again, there's not a lot of separation between those in the top 25 and top 10 between off the tee and approach. We'll look at around the green and putting really quick. It's a little bit different. I would say a half a shot between the top 25 and top 10. So around the green, maybe you kind of peek at that in the time machine a little bit and see if there was any indication that around the green was a predictive factor in the last 3 years. And then putting is the obvious last differential. So between those who made the cut, they gained about a putt or a stroke putting in the event. And then if you go to the top 25, they gained over 2.3. So a full, almost full 1.5 shots difference. And then there in the top 10 is 3. So basically 1.5 strokes between the top 25 from the made cut guys, and then another stroke between the top 10 and the top 25 guys. So that is your difference maker. Off the tee is interesting. Hopefully, I've already heard people talking about off the tee and distance. So hopefully that's, I don't know, maybe people think because off the tee doesn't show a big difference, they won't go that route. But we know with like this data and the time machine that it's very obvious that off the tee is a huge factor, specifically distance. So we'll talk about the time machine here in a second. Driving distance distribution. This is probably where the off the tee specific stat shows up as like not being hugely valuable or a big difference maker. You have 2 tee shots between 250 and 270. So just mathematically, there's not much to gain on somebody if everybody's hitting it 250 to 270. 270 to 290, there's 5 tee shots. So again, in the same boat, Rory most likely doesn't have a huge opportunity to gain strokes when the field average on, hole 2 is 285 or hole 8 is 271. He's likely laying back into that range as well. 290 to 310 is where we'll start to see some differences. There's 2 tee shots there. And then 310 to 330, a pretty high number, actually. We have 3 tee shots between 310 and 330. That is really where Rory and Xander, those types of players, will see the biggest advantage on this type of golf course. And then approach distance is really linear. It's almost, almost scary. So we have 50 to 125, right around 12% of approach shots. 125 to 150, we're just at 16%. 150 to 175, you're at 20%. 175 to 200, you're at 24%. And then 200 plus, you are at 27%. So a very linear combination there. You can kind of see that gradually go up. The biggest one is, I'd say 200 plus is much less than a PGA Tour average golf course. So those longer approach shots are a little bit less relevant here. And then we have far less approach shots in that 50 to 125 range. I would say the meat of this golf course would still count the 200 to 225, but we'll say 175 to 200, and then equally 125 to 175. All right, lead in form, and then we'll talk about time machine stuff. So pretty easy. We can see these last 3 winners: Robert McIntyre, Rory McIlroy, Xander Schauffele. Between Rory and Xander, obviously a fantastic profile, gaining strokes in every single strokes gain category, gaining against the field in all the traditional stats categories. So birdie or better is up, bogey or worse is down, green regulation is up. Robert McIntyre is a little bit different off the tee. I mean, there's a lot of commonality between him and Rory and Xander, but you can see there was, a dip in approach. Proximity was up a little bit off the tour average that he's played against. Birdie or better was still positive. Bogey or worse was still less than the field. So generally speaking, he was scoring quite well. Tee to green was positive. So that's all to say there's one winner out of the last three that wasn't gaining in every single category. That's not enough for us to really get a easy assumption about what matters the most here. So let's hop into the time machine. I will use the easy one for this video / podcast. The full one, if you go into Pro Tools and then Stat Model Pro, you can go back to any PGA Tour event and look at the lead-in form for any players, for any stats. You can do a weighted model and kind of basically carbon copy a model for the current week. If you found something that holds a lot of weight, you think is very predictive, that's a very easy way to do it. But this is the other easier way to summarize using our lead-in stats, which is just the same exact stuff: strokes gained and the traditional stuff like driving accuracy, driving distance, green regulation, proximity, birdie or better, bogey or worse, etc. So this is what the top 10 looked like. Let's go back to the top 25. We can look at off the tee. Yeah, off the tee was pretty big, gaining 0.3 on average for everybody in the top 25. So that's your biggest jump there. Let's see. Yeah, Rory was gaining a full stroke. Richard Manziel only had 2 rounds, was gaining about a stroke, and he finished 10th. Colin Morikawa, Xander Schauffele, Aberg, McIntyre's in there. Yeah, very good as far as off the tee. Let's look at approach. Still pretty positive, not as positive throughout. I would say if we looked at top 10, it would be pretty prevalent. Yeah. So basically, if you looked at the top 10, only 3 guys were losing strokes on approach last year that finished in the top 10. We talked about around the green. We can look at that really quick. Pretty good, actually. Only 2 guys were losing strokes around the green. That was Thagala and Wyndham Clark. Everybody else was gaining around the green. So that might be something we look into a little bit more, that nobody else typically looks at around the green for obvious reasons. Putting, mostly average. McIntyre was putting really well. Rory, coincidentally, was putting well, and so was Morikawa. But most of these are right around, minus 0.2 to positive 0.4. Not a huge value add, in my opinion. Birdie or better, not much, honestly. Looks pretty mixed. Definitely more positive than negative, but mostly mixed. I wouldn't say anything just completely stands out. Was bogey or worse, about the same. And then driving distance, driving accuracy, definitely a driving distance advantage. You had all but 3 were gaining strokes or gaining distance against the field. And I would say 6 of them were gaining, or I should say 7 of them were gaining over 4 yards per drive against the field. It's pretty good. Driving distance, literally nothing. Aaron Rai, Colin Morikawa, but Morikawa is doing a lot of stuff really well. Let's quickly look at the 23 and 22. We only have 3 years, so we can keep this short and still look through each of those years. So here's the top 25 off the tee. Yeah, unbelievable. Unbelievable. The off the tee numbers are really good. Obviously, there's always outliers with guys not having good form. Like, they got to come back to their regression a little bit. Generally speaking, guys don't just continue to get worse. David Lingmerth might. Olesen obviously came back to better form this year, but like Nick Taylor, losing 0.3 strokes off the tee, at some point that's going to get turned around, most likely. Same with Ben Griffin, Tom Hoagie. So there's always going to be outliers in that regard, but you could see the vast majority, very, very, man, I would say over almost 20 of the top 25 gaining considerable amounts off the tee. I'm talking like over half a stroke off the tee. Really big numbers. Approach looks similar. Yeah, again, you have a few outliers like McIntyre was losing strokes on approach. Again, this is 2023, not the year he won. Yeah, approach looks good around the green. A little bit less, I guess. Yeah, I would say considerably less value on the around the green. I wouldn't completely discount it though, but I would say it's definitely in 23 was less valuable. Let's look at the top 10 though. Yeah, it looked like more value add for the top 10 than the top 25, which is interesting. So like basically a threshold would be looking at off the tee number 1, approach certainly number 2, around the green, or looking at tee to green if you want, because tee to green includes around the green. A top 10 threshold would definitely be using around the green. If you're looking for a broader pool, either not including around the green or knocking it down considerably, it would probably be fine. But yeah, if you're really looking for high finishers, you can see around the green is very strong. And I would say putting is less. That's each year's a little bit variable. And then when we look at driving distance, even more so, McIlroy, Binion, Nikolai Hogard, Scotty Scheffler, Terrell Hatton, Tommy Fleetwood, all gaining a bunch of yards off the field that they're playing in driving distance. They finished first, third, sixth, sixth. Like, yeah, sign me up for a little bit extra driving distance this week. And then lastly, we'll look at 2022. Let's pull off the tee only. Yeah, again, pretty strong. Not as strong as the last 2 years. The field looks okay. I guess it may be a little bit weaker that first edition in 2022, but definitely still positive. I mean, we're talking like on average 0.3 strokes off the tee for everybody in the top 25. That's really good. Approach a little bit. Again, you get one guy that pulls down the whole average, Rasmus Hogard, losing 2 strokes on approach, which is interesting. Everybody else was pretty positive. So I think it's pretty straightforward, guys. Especially for a link style, you would think there's like some trickiness or other stuff to really dig into. I think around the green has a little bit of value. Let's see. Yeah, driving distance looks pretty strong. So I think you could easily make a weighted model. We could pull in, we can actually just use our lead in form stats. Let's just take a quick look at this. We want off the tee. This is just using strokes gain. This is not using Spectrum. The lead in stats are just kind of apples to apples strokes gain without any adjustments. So strokes gain off the tee, we'll do 30. Actually, we'll do 40. Strokes gain approach, we'll do 25. Around the green, we'll do 10. If I can type. Putting, we'll do 5. We'll just do a small amount. Driving distance is not in here. We're missing driving distance. So now we got to go add it. Hang on a second. Okay, so we want off the tee, approach, around the green. I'm going to leave putting out. I'll probably add tee to green now. And then for off the tee, we definitely want driving distance. And I think that was it. Pretty easy. So let's take a look at that now. Let's do a little bit here. 40 off the tee, 25 approach, 10 around the green. We want to bump up. There we go. I'm just kind of tinkering with this a little bit. So we're going to do an even split basically. So off the tee approach 25% each, driving distance an extra 25%. So heavily skewed towards distance with the off the tee number, around the green 10%, tee to green, just an overall, balanced metric, 10% as well. We can see what that shakes out at. We'll do minimum 8 rounds. So we got Hogard. Let's see. Yeah, Hogard, I'll do percentile. So you can see Hogard, Norgard, Potgieter, Goddard, Svensson, McElroy, Hogard again. Honestly, the Hogard's probably a pretty good duo this week, even as bad as they've been. I guess Nikolai started to show some form, but you got Taylor Pendrith, a fantastic driver of the golf ball. That makes a lot of sense. Jake Knapp as well. A lot of good players from America going in this week. Kevin Yu, Benion, Wyndham Clark, Schmid. Pretty good list. But yeah, you can see how that's heavily weighted towards off the tee and specifically distance. And if you want to, bump up, you could always add in like strokes gained total and just make sure we're not missing, guys that are playing well or guys that are hitting some of these like metrics pretty well, but not playing well. There's 2 ways you can kind of look at that. Let's do this. And okay. So if I run it that way, we move up, Goddard up. Then we got Hogard, Potgieter, Norgard, Jesper Svensson, McElroy, Scheffler, Pendrith, Knapp, Hogard, and Schauffele. And remember, like this, when you start to skew like a specific stat like distance, obviously that's going to hurt a guy like Scheffler, who's not the longest guy out there. He's 79th percentile in driving distance. Everything else he is 100th percentile or really close. So, adding that distance is going to hurt him, and he won't be at the top of your model in this aspect. But yeah, this looks pretty good. I like the idea. You could do further filtering too. Like this is something I would do. You take like approach and just kind of get an idea for where's the 50th percentile. So like Goddard is 53rd percentile. Maybe we want to go a little bit higher. Let's say 75th percentile. So Greaserman is 75th in approach. That's 0.44. So let's just say we want to make sure everyone is gaining over 0.3, which aligns with the time machine that we just looked at. Off the tee is the same thing, greater than 0.3. And then that starts to shrink down your pool. Now we have Scotty number 1, Jake Knapp number 2, Greaserman number 3. Pretty small list here. Ryan Gerard, Daniel Berger, Harris English. So it takes a little less bump off of the driving distance and puts a little more emphasis on consistent off the tee and approach. You could just bump it to tee to green if you want. We're really going down rabbit holes now. Let me reset that. Let's just do 0.5 for tee to green. Yeah, we still got Goddard up, Hogard, Potgieter, Svensson, Scheffler. So pretty close. But that should do it, guys. Like I said, we'll do the ISCO, which you can always search any of these tournaments in the search bar up here. You can go get the past leaderboards and their stats, spectrum data, etc. So we have obviously a lot of data for the ISCO championship. It is a different course this year, but we'll take a look at the scoring attributes for each of those years. It's been pretty consistent. So with that being said, guys, best of luck this week. Should be a fun event. As always, you can hit the like button, you can share, and you can check us out at fantasygolfbag.com. Best of luck this week. We'll see you later.